So moving forward, okay, completely stripped, and I hate that side of it, I have to say. You know, I mean, just stripping down dirty engines and all the. So anyway, we're now at a position where we can try to kind of make it look pretty again, make it look like somebody owns it, as they say. Yeah, so we've just used the I just find this the best. It's a personal, but I always find this the best. The Worth engine enamel looks the closest satin black to your standard original, you know, like black paint on, and it is actually quite durable once you get it you know, through a few heat cycles and get it hardened. So so yeah, we'll just get the paint off the gasket surfaces, and so I'll just show you around this side. I've got pretty much head gasket faces nice and clean. Yeah, around here. So is that my fingerprint there? Needs a little bit more there, I think, perhaps. But no, looks a lot better than it did inside. So we can start to make it look, you know, a little bit like somebody owns it, as they say. So from here we can, if you can pick that up on the bores are nice. Cross hatching still showing in the bores. This is still bolted in, the actual cam chain slipper. So so yeah, looking good, and we can think about putting the gearbox back in. So I want to get the gearbox all cleaned down in petrol, and then I think we can start and do more in-depth videos moving forward from here, because I mean they've been a bit short and sweet. I know, it's just that lathered up dirty engine, you know, as you're pulling it apart, and you sort of like, you know, just want to get it in bits so that we can start and see, well, the nice bit of it going back together. And I'm going to do the oil mod. I've got the oil gallery in here to clean out. I'm just going to put I've got like a long, well, I actually used to put emery cloth in, you know, in a drill, but I'm not going to do that in here. I'm just going to put a rag on it, but just because it's quite deep, so I'll just put a small bit of rag on the end and just do it by hand and clean out the gallery in here. So the big end galleries in the crankshaft I'm going to clean out, because they're drilled bigger than the oil way and then a core plug put in, but that's a perfect opportunity for swarf to sit in the big end galleries. I'll talk a bit more about that when we come to putting the crank back in. So but yes, onwards and upwards, as they say, and we'll start and put a few bits back in it. But yeah, from your Worth agent, I personally think, I mean, it's down to 650 degrees C. The Baldur air-cooled VF750 I've got behind me, that's been done in it for a long time. And it, like I say, it is actually quite hard wearing. Not like petrol, but you have to be a bit careful with it. But it's, you know, it actually gives what I think is the closest. Anyone got any better, you know, suggestions? I'm all ears. You know, I don't get me wrong, I haven't tried everything, so somebody has got some other, like, hey, try this. But I mean, I think there's a PJ1 spray out as well. I've not actually tried that, but I've kind of, you get to like something, like I say, this Worth stuff, and I don't know, if you like it, you stick with it, don't you? So okay, great stuff. Moving on, we'll pick it up in a bit. Okay, so let's just have a look at just a little bit more in depth into the oil circuit on these engines. I'm actually looking at experimenting with a few different things at the minute. I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to use. I've got one of the sandwich plates offline, you know, online, you can buy online. Just let me take it off and we'll have a bit more clarification. So I know on the works bikes for this cam oiling problem, they took off behind the oil filter, where the oil filter goes on here. Let me just move that top case so we can see stuff a little bit clearer. Oh, there's some weight to that top one. Right, so down here we can see where I haven't cleaned the mounting face off yet, but we can see where the oil filter screws onto the. Now I know on the works bikes they had, from the pictures I've seen, there's possibly some more in depth than I've seen, I'm not sure, but the pictures I have actually seen show like a sandwich plate, something similar to this. Now there is a few different versions of this, just let me get the other one. So this is one I've actually had for quite a while, this one. So if you have a look at so it would go on, I'll just take that banjo out of there. With the O-ring, it would go on the side of the engine like that, and that screw would go through there, centralise it and screw it on. Okay, what this one does is, so we were that way up to the engine. Okay, so let's just turn that round a second and get a head into gear for this. So the oil's coming out of the side, not through the centre, from the side there, as we discussed before. So it's hitting the inside of here, so it hits in here and has to go out this pipe. So this is an oil cooler one, so that means that it can go out to a cooler and back. As it comes back in this side, we flip it over, it comes out here, and then it goes through the filter, back, and then back down the centre. So it's a sandwich plate that basically it's a takeoff for an oil cooler, essentially for cars. But you know, these engines run like essentially like a car type oil filter, as long as you get the threads right and the actual diameter right, it's just the same. So now that one, like I say, all of it, absolutely all of the oil coming out the oil pump gets sent down that pipe. Okay, well it's actually that one, but it gets sent out of there. It's not like a case of just some of it is bled off to an oil cooler, or all of it is actually sent down there through the cooler and back. So with this one, what we get with this one is, if you imagine, well, picture that one there now on there, all that is just the same. You can actually see down there, and if I shine my torch through there, you can see where the oil coming out of the oil pump into there would go. So essentially it comes straight from there, straight into the oil filter as normal, through the filter and then back down the centre. But what we do have then is 2 points on, well actually 3, to be able to use 2 points that you think, okay, what we could do. So let's just tighten that up and have a look at that. Just give me 2 seconds, just nip that up and we'll have a look, and you can see where my train of thought is going. I don't like the fact that the hex part of the nut digs into the anodised aluminium. It's like it wants a washer behind it, so we'll be looking at that as well. Okay, so it's just nipped. So now what we've got, if we look now, you can see that light through there, like I say. So essentially now oil filter sits on here, on this thread, just a sandwich plate in between, but we've now got 2 takeoff points that we've got a bigger feed than, what do I do with that banjo bolt now? There. Bigger feed than the original banjo bolt up here on the top case, feeding both cams. So with a pipe coming out feeding both cams, both banks of cams, okay, my train of thought now is, like the works bikes had, is to tee off here and have one however I route it, I don't know, until it's actually back in the frame or the engine's built back again, but essentially one up to one bank and one up to the other bank. And what it would mean then is we just block off the, let's call it the inferior oil side, oil supply side, that could be better. I mean, when they raced these, they were really quite potent and quite successful, but they didn't use the original oil feed to the cams. They used a system very like this. So again, without getting oil everywhere, trying to picture it if you've not seen one before, but then now that, keep it just tilted back that way, you get what I mean. She just goes in place of where the oil filter, but we now have two good tee-off points. Okay, so that's my train of thought for that at the minute. Whether I use that one or whether I actually try, although it is a bit limited space wise, whether I try and fit a cooler, because the cooler one still has two tee-off points. Okay, crap there. So if we had that one on and absolutely everything got sent round the cooler, then back from the cooler, then into the filter and back into the galleries, but we do still have two takeoff points that we could. There's still room in there to get a banjo off there, and but it's whether we could get a cooler on the bike. That's my. It is quite busy down there. There's a radiator down there and the belly pan and the upper radiator, and it's kind of aesthetically as well. Would it be feasible? So that might be a case of until it gets put back in the bike, and just keep using my hand cream on here. So yeah, I don't know, but what I'm going to look at, we'll just look at now. We'll just look at a little bit more in detail of the oil circuit on it, and it really is actually quite simple. So I'm going to try and keep it as simple as possible. But for anyone who's interested, it might be it might be informative. So anyone who's not quite sure. So here we go. Let's just move them and them out of the way, and let's now just concentrate on the engine itself. Right, okie dokie. So where's that pipe? If you remember from the previous video, we talked about off the oil cooler, it has this pipe, okay. So off the oil cooler, sorry, I'm getting old. Right, off the oil pump sucked oil from the gallery, from the sump here, and literally everything from the oil pump went into this pipe, bar a little bit. We'll come back to a little bit in a minute. Let's say 90% pressurized oil is in this pipe. Okay, so the sump actually holds that pipe. There's a little place in the sump floor that holds that pipe in, so it can't pop it off. We talked about the oil pressure relief valve that sits in there with it. So we've now got pressurized oil in here. In here is there. Okay, so it's in the outer. So the pressurized oil now is in the outer area. So it now comes into this outer area, into the filter, through the holes in the filter, and the little, it looks like a little diaphragm valve in there, through the paper element inside the filter, and then once it's come through the filter, it comes into the center part. So now it starts coming out of the center part, okay, which is now this fitting on here. So we're now out the center part. So if I'm going to try and set this up now that we can see banjo bolt over there as well. I forgot we've got tea on the go again. We haven't had a tea on the go for a bit. So anyway, okay, so now I don't know now. I'm just going to see if I can pick this up. Oh yes, right. So you're all following to the point that the oil pressure now has come through the filter and gone. It's now clean filtered oil, headed to do its work. Okay, so it's now headed through the centre of the filter that's screwed on here into there, and the only place that goes at the minute, this 90%, remember, if I put the torch on the oil path, I'm going to try and get this right so you can see it at the same time as holding that into that long tube oil gallery. Okay, so it enters that tube. I'm just hoping that's why I'm moving it around, that camera's picked that up. Okay, so it's now out the filter into there. The only place it goes is into here, which is this is the manufacturing process of this, that Honda have cast this piece into the cases. They've drilled down the aluminium in the machining process, and then a 90-degree they've drilled line bored it, drilled it down this side so they meet up. So essentially now we've got a chamber under the crank that's absolutely pressurized with clean filtered oil. Okay, and we have a bung in the end of here. So now what it does, if we look at the castings, you can actually follow it. If we look at the casting from this tube chamber here, we see a casting going up, and also, so let me take this off, it's probably easier just bear with me. So we see a casting going up from this gallery, let's call it the gallery, which is what it is, that's now pressurized up, and there's a little hole there in the top. Now if I get my, here's one I made earlier, screwdriver, so from this gallery here, up the drillings and into the line board area that the crank sits in, with a hole, same there. You can ensure these are clean before you put all this back together, obviously. And there. Okay, so that's the oil feeds coming out of that main gallery for the crank. Okay, so obviously we have, that was pointing up, trying to do it with, so there we go, as I said, and there, that's the drillings into this casting, and one there. Okay, so that gives us 4 points off this gallery here, 4 points that are pressurized clean oil is coming up and into to feed the crank. And the holes are quite big. What is it, 6mm hole probably? That's a bit, so it's a good kind of 6mm. Now most of that 90% we said as a you know, a simple figure has gone off to out to the oil filter, but there was a little bit left. Remember the other chamber that's actually sat from the oil pump on the previous video? I'll turn it over for that, I'll come back to that in a minute. So the crank now has pressurized oil at 4 points going into the main bearings. So the crank sits on its main bearings and turns there with a pressurized oil feed, and obviously once it bleeds out it just drains back down into the sump and gets picked up, filtered, forced back into this gallery again and up to the crank again. But it also just does something else as well at the point here, so just bear with me. Right, I've just sat the crank back in. Obviously there's no shells in here yet at the minute, and it's literally just placed in the cases for the purpose of this. So remember, we've got an oil feed coming up to the hole in here that actually lubricates this bearing surface. But while it's lubricating that bearing surface, it also goes down that hole. So there's the hole. Okay, and if I turn the crank, if I can because the chains are on, but let me just have a look. Notice the identification numbers on the crank for big end shell sizes. Okay, so there's another hole. come back to him in a second and put it back the other way around. So we've still got oil in this area here of the bearing, but with this oil here it actually pressurizes it, sends it right down into there. Okay, so bearing that in mind, just rotate it back now. Okay, so the oil feed that was underneath is heading straight up into this big end journal here. If you notice the little like core plug that sat in the end of there. A point to note here is that core plug is, what is it, 13, 14 mil diameter, but the feed diameters, I don't know, be 4 mil, something like that. So what that ends up being is a kind of a chamber in here of that diameter with a cap on the end, but then the chamber's bigger than the holes, and what it can actually create is a little bit of an area of a bit of a sludge trap in there. So it's always worth, if you're stripping yours down, is cleaning that area out. Make sure you spray, you know, some like WD or that TT oil or whatever, you know, this it's like a light oil, this stuff, double TT, and keep blowing it out with the airline, and you'll be surprised at the muck that comes out of there. You really would, because centrifugal force keeps it pinned to the side. It's a bit of a sludge trap, so obviously this will be all cleaned out before it goes back together. So yeah, it feeds the main bearings and also feeds the big ends. And now these are the babies that really do the work, the big ends. So as you can see, really nice. There's no scoring, so we're just going to give them a good clean before it goes back together, ensure there's nothing on this that needn't be there. As you can see, it just rocks in there because there's no shell bearings in here. We'll touch on the shell bearings when I actually start putting it back together. So there is our 90%. That's all it does. 90% of that oil feed is to feed this crank, the bit that does the work. So again, to recap, it comes out the filter, being filtered through the centre, and then hits this chamber at the bottom, and Honda have bored through to meet that one at that side, and then drilled down, and the 4 points to take 4 tee-offs of it, and it has a bung on the end of here. So it's bunged off that, so it's, and this outer colour actually holds that bung in place. So there we have a gallery, and it's quite a big gallery, you can get your finger in, that's supplying clean, high pressure oil to the crank. And then obviously it bleeds off as it's done its work and just falls back down to the sump for the whole process to start again. So just bear with me, I'm going to remove this crank and I'll turn it upside down where the last 10% goes. Okay, so we'll turn this over now, take the crank back out again. As we said, all of the oil is fed into these 4 points with the shell bearings put in. Okay, feeds the crank, feeds the big ends, and that's it. All that, basically 90% of all the oil pressurized is fed to the crank. There's little cutouts that when the case is on, you're going to get all sorts of oil being flung around everywhere with the engine. So remember, we've got gears in here that are predominantly, there is pressurized parts, but predominantly splash fed. Okay, so just turn that over for a second and let's have a look. Do I need my block? Excuse my arm there for the minute. Right, in fact we're going to need to be upside down for the minute. The oil pump sits on these mounting points here, and there was, out the oil pump, there's one part of the oil pump, if you remember off the previous video, 90% of it went into here, but let's say 10% of it goes down in here. It bleeds it off straight out of the oil pump and actually unfiltered. Remember, this side, it's coming out of the oil pump and it's sending it to be filtered before it goes to the crank. Makes sense. But this side is straight out of the oil pump and into the gallery to do the work. Okay, so what we've got, it pressurizes, we're calling it 10% into this little chamber here, this little hole. So if you turn it over, that's this little casting that is there And in the manufacturing process we actually see a little bung there where they've bunged it off on the end. So they've drilled all the way through that little casting and drilled up into that drilling that they've done to create a, so it goes in and it tees. So what we then get, in fact it's easier showing you that way. So this now is hitting that bung on the end. Okay, so I wonder if we can now, to prove it, shine up there. Can we shine up there? We can, so I'll see if you can get you guys to see this. So there's our 10% coming out of our oil pump going into that bit, and if we see this, you can see it going into there. So it goes into this chamber, this gallery we're calling it, as we said. So in this gallery, excuse the old, this is off a different engine this, but so if we try and imagine here that being on there, so it comes out of there and this O-ring seals against it, okay, but now it hits in there into there, and you can see the bung again in the end where they've drilled in that way, and it feeds this in between this seal here to feed the bearing. And when I get the gearbox, start to put the gearbox, I'll show you where there's like holes in the collar that runs in this seal, like holes in it ready for it to, so it essentially what it's doing is it's coming in through the holes in the collar and it's entering the actual shaft of the gearbox. Then the shaft has little holes along its shaft to lubricate each gear as it's turning on it, which again, you know, clever, and it's a way of getting the oil there. So there's one side of it, but obviously through here, and then following this drilling up, we come into this little, and it's obviously stepped right down with a tiny little hole in there. So again, back it goes, but this time it's in the upper case. So let's have a look at the upper. In fact, if I put that, just rest it there for a minute, if we can get it kind of somewhere. Just see what you're, I'm going to take it off this tripod again. I know it's a bit wobbly here, but okay. So we've said it comes out of here. So it's fed from the oil pump into this gallery, into this cover, when that's up there. So when it's on, this bearing here is pressurised, because it pressurizes into the collar, through the bearing in the bearing carrier, and then through the shaft, out through little holes in the shaft to the gears along it. Also comes through there, and that, leave that neutral light out of the way, corresponding that, you see the castings following where they drill it, that flipped up goes to there. Okay, so inside there is now an oil feed inside there, we've got a pressurized area there, and that goes to feed the selector forks. They're actually pressurized to the back of the selector forks, so as they're moving there's an oil feed to actually inside the selector forks, which again is, wow, it's easier to show that in more detail when I get to that. So that's one side of it. From there, as we've said, it comes through up here into here, and that is our banjo bolt for our cams. But when you look at how everyone else has had a supply of oil before they even think about, you know, feeding off to the, and there's our cams supply there. There it is. So it's fed from here, and fed from that 10% from the oil pump through here, feeds all the other stuff, and it actually feeds into the clutch pushrod area to feed the input shaft. So all these areas have got oil before it makes its way through to out here, would you believe, and actually goes up to the cams. So hence the reason, I'm going to do it, but previously, hence the reason Honda did it. Certainly for, it looks well now, doesn't it, with that, you know, a new satin black on there. Yeah, the way Honda did it before, sorry, at the time that they were racing it, but they never implemented it on their road bikes. So, a bit of a crazy time, you know. So, so yeah, I mean, I hope that's relatively, you know, that goes on there. And it's kind of just following the holes and the drillings, etc. in, to just see the actual oil circuit. And obviously, because it's all sealed up and gasketed and sealed, it just eventually, as it's been pressurised into areas, it then just falls down into the, you know, and runs back down into the sump. But the fact that it's actually pressurised in the centre of the gear as the gear's turning on the shaft, for instance, and then the gear obviously flings it out everywhere, and the gear just splash feeds itself as it's been used. When it feeds up through the clutch pushrod side, it also feeds up into the bearing for the at the back of the clutch. So everywhere's actually taken care of. You know, the actual oil circuit at the bottom is really quite good. The bit that they really drop the ball on is this oil feed here up to the cams. So anyway, with something like that, I'm not saying it's going to be that, but with something like that plate, this is where I'm going to attempt to do what the HRC boys did and tee off. And it's reversible if we use that. You know, it is a reversible, but we're going to tee off. I don't see why we would want to reverse it if we've done it, but anyway, it's reversible, so we're going to tee off down there that's got a real copious amount of oil, and we're going to tee off there and feed the cams from down there with a nice braided, 2 braided oil lines, you know, something along the lines of that. Looks nice as well as functional. So there we go. Hope that particular one has just been a bit of a help, but from here on it actually starts going back together. I'm going to get the gearbox washed down in petrol, get it all completely washed off of any old traces of any oil, etc., all that sort of thing. We've got some seals to change, and yeah, we'll go from there. But you know, it might have been boring if you kind of know what, but it's always, I think it's interesting just to see the circuit that the oil takes. And I hope I explained it well. So anyway, we'll pick it up as we actually start rebuilding. Thank you very much.